looking like breeze.
Hello, and welcome to the Anexinet Infrastructure Modernization Podcast. Here on AIM, we invite industry professionals and subject matter experts on to discuss current trends and technology topics. Today, we will be talking about backup and recovery in the age of ransomware with Cohesity. Joining us today is Fidel Michieli, Senior Systems Engineer of Sales from Cohesity. Fidel, how are you doing today?
Good. How are you? My name is Fidel. I've been in the IT industry for almost 3 decades in 4 different countries across continents. This is actually my first sales job. And, I started as a 2-time Cohesity customer and loved the technology so much that I had to cross the line and start, evangelizing for other people. So I've been here over 4 years now.
Not bad. We're going to have to look back through the records, but you might be our most well-traveled podcast guest.
Yes.
So
I've been about, yes.
And joining us as well is a special guest, Vic Simon, infrastructure pre-sales architect from right here at Anexinet. Vic, how are you doing?
Doing well. Yourself, Chris?
Well, I can't complain. I probably still will.
Yeah, I've been here at Anexinet for 3 years. I've been doing infrastructure IT and enterprise architecture now for, Lordy, the better part of 28, 29 years. Too many years to count, I guess, but excited to be here today.
All right, and I appreciate both of you being here. And this is actually a good place to start because both of you have a long track record. And one of the things that has been consistent through IT is that backups are important, whether that's just been something people say or something people take seriously. Fidel, I'll start with you. Over your career, how do you feel like the concept of backup and recovery has been received over time? Has it changed from when you started your career into the position that you're in now?
Absolutely. I mean, for the most part of my career, we thought about backup about, 2 main things, right? It was about technical failures and natural disasters. So, you had locations where you had to make sure that you had a copy of the data out because it was prone for, hurricanes or earthquakes or floods or any kind of natural disaster. And the second case was, typically technical failures where you have power issues, where you have human error, equipment failure, data corruption, but these were, self-contained issues, more specific to locations, specific to data. Now we're seeing a lot of cyber events, or what they're called cyber events, and that actually changes the whole conversation. I don't know, what are your thoughts on that, Vic?
Yeah, no, I think you hit it right on the head. Back when I started, I actually came up through the backup ranks as well. It was really about, the admin who deleted a Word file or, a small data set that may have gotten corrupted. And, through the years and through the decades, as the data sets have grown and we've gone from gigabytes of data on site to petabytes and multiple petabytes, backup has sort of evolved, and the role that it's taken in the data center has also evolved. We're starting to see the lines blurred a lot more between business continuity and disaster recovery, especially with cyber attacks, ransomware, malicious behavior, the scorned employee or bad actor. Backup is no longer a nice to have, or, hey, I'm trying to protect from that singular data recovery moment, to an integrated part of a security posture as well as disaster recovery.
I think one big thing to consider is that in the old days, backup used to be an IT problem. Now these are company-wide problems. If you have a data exfiltration event, that is a company-ending problem potentially. So we live in a trust world. Data exfiltration and internal threats, those are all subject to this trust for companies. So I think that's one of the reasons that companies are changing their view on backup and recovery.
Yeah, I think that makes sense because previously, if I'm understanding everything correctly, backup and recovery was considered kind of an archival type of thing. It was done. It had to be done. You knew you had to recover if there was, like you were saying, a force majeure, a major weather incident, or a major personnel mistake, upgrade, disaster, that kind of thing. All the way back when I first started my IT career, which is in the early 1800s, one of my first jobs was actually swapping tapes out of a literal tape library, putting them in like a suitcase that would then get sent off site to, say, Iron Mountain or a protected place like that. And they would just sit there. We knew they were there, and we were able to do a nice check mark on some type of an audit form to say, yes, we have backups, and yes, we know where they are. Then everybody crosses their fingers, and then we say, and yes, of course we tested recovery.
Well, Chris, and the thing is that if you go only slightly further back on the timeline, back to when phones had cords and Facebook didn't exist, the digital age was just coming to bear. So if a server went down, 90 to 100%, I would argue that in today's world, 100% of the company is dependent upon their digital assets. You go back 25, even just 30 years, which I know to some of our listeners may seem like an eternity, but believe it or not, we were actually alive then. I would venture to say that a company could lose its digital infrastructure and still carry on business. And in that 25-year to 30-year time frame, it's totally been flipped on its head. So literally, when I started, I wasn't lying. When I started coming up through the ranks, there were companies that had no backup strategy. Backup was considered a cost. Why do we need that type of technology? And very quickly and very rapidly, as more and more of the business roles became digitized, that just ended. It became a mandatory. Even to this day, people don't realize when we talk backup, the industry has sort of done itself a disservice. What we really need to be talking about is recovery. No one backs up to back up. People back up to recover. I don't know if you feel the same way, Fidel, but that's sort of the way I've always felt about it.
No, that's right on the head. I actually was going to say, look, there's a backup and recovery is one thing, but I completely agree that you don't just back up to have another copy of the data. I think that you back up to have that data do something, and that is recovery. And frankly, the reason why I work for Cohesity is because we do have a different approach through what the technology can do to actually accommodate rapid recovery at scale. And what that does is that to me opens the door to a lot of other issues that are coming up with the data that companies leverage. And I think before you alluded that, the digital world of a company wasn't as important because now all the assets, all the data assets of a company have been digitalized. And with that comes, different complications like regulatory and oversight and these threat vectors that we talked about. But now infrastructure is not even what it used to be. Now you have these cloud SaaS and IaaS locations where you have data. How do you manage all these stuff?
The one thing as well, Fidel, that you just sort of touched upon is not only has everything become digitized, but now you have leaders and people in the business units that never once cared about a server, a switch, a data center, a VM, such as your legal department, your risk mitigation department, your business units. Now they all care about where's my data? Why can't I access my data? Why can't I do my job? So you got basically everyone in the company staring back at IT, and as long as everything's good, everything's good. But when things go bad, they go bad, and they go bad quick. It's how fast can you recover from that event? And I will say that in looking at the partners in the backup community that we work with, Cohesity is definitely one of the top ones that we look at from a technical perspective in terms of immutability and ability to recover.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And before we go into the details of the technology, I think we've been dancing around one of the things that has made this version, this evolution, if you will, of backup and recovery so important and so timely are things like malware and ransomware and the very sophisticated efforts that bad actors are now able to do in order to get your data. And like Fidel, like you were alluding to earlier, actually find ways to get it off your computers and onto their computers. Another thing that we've seen, or at least in the newspaper, have heard about are ransomware or malware or viruses that deliberately sit on your environment and your network and do nothing for 30 days so that they can, in fact, poison backups, which changes the way that you would have to go about building a backup and recovery strategy in a way that's more sophisticated than it's ever been before. So can you talk a little bit about the philosophy there, the mindset around how Cohesity approaches these types of projects, looking at it from a security perspective, the ability to recover data in a timely fashion, that sort of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. The big thing to consider is that this is not an infrastructure-centric approach. As Vic was saying, everybody in the organization has turned towards the data, and everybody cares who touches that data, how is that data accessed, and having access to that data. So Cohesity's mission is specific about the data. We don't call ourselves a backup company. We call ourselves a data management company, a modern data management. And our mission is to radically simplify how organizations manage their data and unlock unlimitless value for them. So think of it more than a backup. Think of it more like a Google for the enterprise. Think about a way of overcoming these infrastructure limitations and complexities of where the data is kept in order to expose that data to the right people in the organization to make it valuable or to extract more value. And in that focus, what we're adhering to is there is a National Institute of Standards and Technology. They have a cybersecurity framework, which is constructed around 5 areas. And the 5 is identify, which is basically where do you have the data, protect that data, have copies of that data, make sure you have access control, make sure that you have proactive technology that it's seeing the who, the what, and the where to that data. Detection, which is basically anomalies, events that happen to the data, detection of things that are not what they're supposed to be. And then how do you respond? I always tell people, and Vic, you tell me if it's different, but business continuity conversation, it's a combination between technology, process, and people. There's not one technology that you can implement and magically solve all the company's issues.
No, and you know what? That's the one thing that I really like about Cohesity's solution. And again, to your point, it is a solution. It's not just a product. You guys have really created a hyper-converged data management platform. I don't want to call it a backup solution, but it is a hyper-converged data management platform. When you start looking at things like how you handle data ingestion from the standpoint of once it's written down to Cohesity, the bits are never modified. In the event of a restore, you're spinning up a zero-cost clone and presenting the data out that way, which, that piece of it right there is really cool in terms of protection from malware and ransomware. As Chris alluded to, malware can come in, and Chris, you were a little off on the number. They've seen malware sit idle for over 200 days, yes, not just 30. But the main reason for that is to
at a certain point, the malware has stopped hiding and has just started to be lazy.
You
would think so, but you know what? They're acting like a 9th degree ninja assassin, because what they know is if they were to just infiltrate the infrastructure or the company and fire off their malware, all you have to do is go to last night's backup and recover.
Yep.
If they are hidden and they stay dormant for 200 days, there aren't many companies, unless they're obligated by regulations like healthcare, finance, things of that nature, to have backups that may not be more than 90 days old. Okay. And even then, even if you go back to 201st day of backup, you still have 200 days worth of lost data, essentially. But what's really cool is because of the immutability, which means, the data cannot be modified, data structure of Cohesity, malware does not have the ability to walk that file system. Oh, and that's the other nasty thing about malware. If it gets into a backup system that is based on a traditional file system, a lot of them have technology built into them to go in and walk that structure and infect previous backups. So really nasty, gnarly stuff that, you don't want to expose not only your company, but your job to. That would be definitely a resume generating incident. So when you take a look at the Cohesity's ability to scale out system, not scale up, and the immutability, and I just found out today as well that they're introducing NAS capability, which is really cool. Not quite sure if it's meant for this podcast, but we can get to it if we want. There's a lot of cool stuff going on over there at Cohesity.
Yeah, and it seems like a lot of it is kind of built around this security being front foot. So let's talk about some of those bullet points in detail. I'm looking at the framework here now. Identify seems to me to be the most straightforward, or so people would think, right? That would just be, I want Cohesity to protect that and that and that.
Yeah, it is. It is. And the problem here is that our IT friends have data sprawl across servers, data sources, and now clouds. So how do you identify all the data in all locations that the company has footprint? And I think that's where a single pane of glass helps. I think that's where we just released what it's called a security advisor, and that basically tells you as things change in your environment, as your security posture changes, and as people do things to accommodate to the needs of the business, to go turn it off, go close that door and that window that you open. We see that security is something that is not stale. It's something that you need to be on top. I was reading, that there are actually malicious groups, because now this is by groups. There's a group or a gang called Conti that they actually now developed a product, and now they attack particular products that have exposed vulnerabilities. I think this is one of the things that scares me, as Vic was saying. If I don't have immutable copies of my data and I don't have a long retention, basically we've seen some customers that have been hit, I'm here in the Carolinas, where they have different products and the data is just gone. We can't even size the environments to replace that with Cohesity because there's just no data. So I think from my perspective and going through the framework, I would like to say this is not an all or nothing situation, right? Cohesity, as Vic was saying, is a scale out model. We don't have to be end all be all at the beginning. We can start by helping being just a target and an immutable one that can grow to accommodate.
Right. I do want to talk about the immutable aspect in a second, because I think that's really important. But in terms of what you're talking about, it sounds like a few of the bullet points that I'm seeing revolve around the idea of analysis and improvements. So would you say that it's a fair statement that Cohesity, like you said, can just be a simple backup target, but you will still be able to leverage some of those insights and information to make your environment more secure? And as you get more comfortable with it, you get more and more value out of things like the security tool that you talked about.
Absolutely. I mean, the first thing that I would ask our listeners is, and we ask our customers, is, do you know what data you have and where? And the answer is no. Nobody, right? Who controls that? Who owns the data? Who's the data owner? And the reality is that we're not in the mind frame of data ownership. And now, even machine learning algorithms are creating data. So who owns that data? I think the first thing, going back to the identify, is we want to perfectly understand, crack open that data and look inside and find potentially sensitive data that we need to be aware that we have there, so that we do something with it, because that could pose another risk to the company. You've heard about these things in Europe, the GDPR, and now in California, the CCPA. Those are hefty fines for keeping PII and HIPAA data. So I think going to the identify one, the first thing that we want to uncover is where and what is your data?
Even if you don't necessarily know the complete answer yourself.
And that's what the tool helps you with, right? That's part of what we do.
Well, and you know what? That's also where the partnership with a company like Anexinet comes into play. You know, we have professional services that can also come in and help a company. I mean, because I know this sounds overwhelming, but Fidel's absolutely spot on. You've got to identify and classify your data and know what you got. And companies are starting to get better about this, but you know, it used to be the case that anyone with a credit card can go out and spin up an Amazon instance, an AWS. A lot of companies are bringing that back in, and the quote unquote shadow IT is starting to get better. It's still prevalent, but it's out there. But you know, that data classification is definitely a key part of this.
And I think that's the key things that NIST puts, right? If I know what data I have, now the second thing is now I have to protect it. Now that means that I will put some controls over that, and I will keep it in different baskets so that my data can span across sources, data centers, clouds, and malicious internal actors, right? We have this concept called zero trust, and that basically is we don't even trust ourselves and our admins. So we're implementing policies to make sure that the data is not overridden. The data is, as Vic was saying, immutable, and we check everything that we write with checksums to make sure that the data is consistent. One thing that Cohesity does that I think is different in the marketplace is we have that data consistency model, and that, you know, if you think about it, being a scale out architecture means that we have nodes, and when we acknowledge a write, that write, we have to have it at least in 2 locations within the cluster before we can acknowledge it. And I think that is a big architectural design for security.
Yeah, those both seem like very valuable ones that fit very nicely into the protect section of the framework. You've got geographical distance, whether it's short range or long range. It sounds like it doesn't really matter. You could conceivably have 2 nodes that are on the other side of the city from one another, or you could have one on the other side of the globe, right?
Yep.
Or there's a third option there, which is, you know, Cohesity also integrates with AWS, Azure, and GCP now.
That helps too.
And one of the things that we're doing with them, especially now with AWS and Azure, is we're coming out with a concept called cloud air gap. And that basically air gap used to be, you know, in the old days, Vic, you remember, and Chris, you used to be the tape guy. It used to be the tape, right? You put it in a box, you ship it somewhere, you know that your data there is immutable. Now there are mechanisms within the clouds and within their worm, you know, write once, read many environments where Cohesity can enable those locks and make sure that we have what we call a cloud air gap solution, where even the cloud admin can delete the data.
Yeah, I think that it's worth spending a little time on that, actually, because in terms of immutable data, I think that's the easiest example that people could have. If I have this tape and I have my backup on this tape, and this tape is not plugged into a computer, nobody can change what's on this tape.
That is,
I think especially right. That's true.
About as air gapped as you get.
What does that mean in a digital footprint type of deployment? Like I think Vic was alluding to earlier, previous online backup solutions, they could be open to having their data deleted or modified, and then all of your backups are gone. But it sounds like the way that Cohesity is doing it, it doesn't matter if it's on the cloud, it doesn't matter if it's on-prem. Once that data is written, it cannot be messed with. It cannot be overwritten, or it cannot be edited. Is that about right?
That is exactly right. And, you know, if you think about different implications with on-prem and SaaS locations, like, you know, the typical, most of the Office 365 users don't have a copy of their data outside of the retention that Microsoft provides. Imagine if you could have a tool that actually creates a backup somewhere else and then have an air gap copy. You know, we see our legal customers having, that is their favorite feature, that we can have 5-year retention on emails for their customers, in a location where we can call it air gap, that is sealed and outside of any data tampering.
So let's talk about the detect phase of the cybersecurity framework. Things like anomalies and events, security monitoring, detecting of issues, and I'm assuming alerting is a big part of this as well. Something that is not generally considered as part of a backup and recovery tool, but since this tool comes at data from a different perspective, can you just walk us through how Cohesity thinks about that phase and how they respond to bad actors behaving badly?
Yeah, it's part of the design, right? One of the things that we do with our single pane of glass is actually aggregate all the metadata for all the data that we back up and or host. And based on that, we use an object-based, and this is important because this is not a whole footprint based. This can be an object based, where we're actually doing a machine learning anomaly detection. And what that does is that it has two main axes. We're focusing on entropy, how random and how the data has changed, and we're focusing on data written. And based on those two axes, we create a score. This is a Bayesian inference probabilistic model where based on those two and the trend that we have, we infer that this could have a higher probability of being a ransomware event or not. And the two things that to me are very cool about Cohesity is that once we detect this, you can select your threshold, right? Everything is a probability, so you can tune that probability up and down. But one of the things we do is if we detect something and you haven't told us if it yay, a ransomware event, or nay, it is a false positive, we will block any recoveries from it. And that means that we will not let you reintroduce bad backups into the environment. And the second thing we do is that we don't just shoot you an email. We have a mobile app, and that mobile app allows us to basically in real time notify you and give you the recover button right then and there to actually recover from that.
That moves us right into the respond area of this framework. So Cohesity's got some tools and some knowledge and understanding of what's going on. An anomaly happens. You recognize, data that's been idle for 4 months now all of a sudden has 500% traffic to it. Lock that into some type of a quarantine and give the user push button control over what they want to do, how they want to respond?
Yes. And that's, as you say, that's where the other architectural design differentiation makes a lot of sense because, and Vic, please help me chime in. Traditional backups are an aggregation of fulls and incrementals and linked chains and, very IO intensive processes to actually recompose that point in time recovery.
Oh, you absolutely hit it on the head. So being able to identify those traffic patterns, and again, when I said that Cohesity is a solution, this is just another piece to that solution, which is the AI that monitors for that activity, and then knows who to alert and say, hey, you might have a problem here. Or you might be doing a restore, you tell us. So, being able to identify that and then also be able to go back to not day 0, but, day -1 data set to do that recovery. It really is a game changer. And this is also why, you see security teams and network admins get really interested in the technology that Cohesity can provide.
And when it comes to the detections and the responses, how does that become a positive informational type of cycle where the longer you run the software around your own particular data set, the more efficient it's going to end up being?
Yeah, the way that Cohesity does it is that we are effectively separating the metadata from the data. And then what we're doing is that all the incremented, we have a patent around a technology called snap trees. And snap trees basically is a metadata operation that allows us to aggregate data based on their metadata. So we construct the fools based on those snap tree patterns. And the idea here is that I have a map to my fool, and I don't have to have any IO operations to merge or synthesize that fool. So when it's time to recover, we can recover at scale in a pretty fast fashion. One thing that I would like to say also is that, as Vic was saying, the fact that we are effectively a NAS device provides us the ability to power on the fully hydrated restore from within the storage platform of Cohesity, whether that's a VM or a database or a NAS, and then just find a way to, if it's a VM, storage vMotion it, and if it's a database, host it within Cohesity or serve that data as a NAS target for the time being. Yeah.
Now, just to be clear on that, this, there are no SLAs or performance guarantees around that. But in a disaster environment or a quick restore scenario, any access to the data is really what you're looking for. So, obviously, if reads come in, they'll hit and it's not available on the production VM or database server. It will read from the Cohesity system, and then those bits get transferred over to the VM immediately. So, it's a really cool feature. It provides for massive parallel restoration. But it's not like you're going to be running production VMs on a Cohesity cluster.
I have a story. When I was a customer, we had our dev center. We had a production issue with our storage, and we didn't have storage to run on. So we had around a 300 VM environment running from Cohesity as the back end. We just did a recover and didn't do a vMotion, and we talked a little bit about how we do the writes and why that's a great thing, but in a performance environment, that actually adds a little bit of latency for databases. So as you were saying, Vic, there's no guarantee of speed, but we were able to run our development environment for 2.5 weeks without causing the business to halt development, and that is quite a story.
Well, and right there is the value. Again, when you're in a disaster scenario like that or a massive restore scenario like that, it's not about the performance per se. It's about keeping the business moving forward. No one cares how fast, as long as it's being done. Another tip of the hat to Cohesity for given the ability to do that.
Yeah, and I think of all the features that we've talked about, I think that's the one maybe that goes back a little bit further or has the most attention. It's certainly the first thing I thought of when Cohesity came across my mind. What we're talking about really is the feature of instant mass restore. And can you just talk about that and the differences between how you would use that in the incident that you're talking about, where a business has a total catastrophic failure of some kind, and they don't just need to recover one backup or one executive's mailbox. They need to recover their entire organization. Otherwise, they are losing, business by the hour.
Need to recover 4 vCenters.
Yeah, we actually had a POC with a bank here in the Southeast, and they said, look, everything that you talk about sounds great, but we have these SLAs for our business, and these are the things that we care about. And they were asking us to recover 2,200 VMs, and their SLA was 8 hours. We were able to recover those VMs, power them on. This is 2,200 VMs, one click, go. They were up within 47 minutes. All the VMs were pinging, all the VMs were able to be logged on, and we completed the migration to their primary storage within under 4 hours. So I think that is the big difference.
Something else just came to mind here when you were going over that story. And this goes back to the beginning of the podcast where we were talking about everything being digitized now. Well, with that comes in some inherent architectural challenges or intricacies from the standpoint of you can have a single database server serving up multiple other servers, front-end servers, web servers, back-end servers, archive servers, ERP servers, you name it. So, the interdependencies, and this goes back to classifying the data and understanding the impact of what that data has on your business. Just by having one server, even though it could have been affecting 8 or 9 other servers that weren't down, but because that one server was down, they were effectively in that blast zone.
Oh, absolutely. Think about what happens if I take down Active Directory services. vCenter. I mean, what do you do? Or DNS.
Yeah.
There's a concept called blast radius. And I think the idea is that we want to control that blast radius, and we want to make sure that, we don't let that blast radius go, big. The other great story I have is, as a customer, that is an all or nothing. We had a big issue situation, but what happens if you have a lot of developers and you don't have storage or resources to provide them with their own environment, and everybody's stepping on each other's toes? I think this instant mass restore within a clone that is writable allows Cohesity to use their test and dev functionality, which basically is cloning databases, VMs, and NAS devices without costing any storage. So
where were you guys 12 years ago when I worked at a company where, no word of a lie, we had at any given time anywhere between 30 and 55 copies of our production data spun up for UAT development, performance analysis. I mean, literally our production footprint of data was only about 7 terabytes. But, when you take into account all of the copies that we had for the different developmental and UAT groups, we were well over 50 terabytes and DR copies and, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that was all on super expensive, I won't say their name, but it was a 3-letter that was bought by Dell. So you draw the conclusion. Storage.
And that used to run expensive. Yeah. And then,
we're talking about BMW, right?
Exactly.
I'm sure he has a BMW. Yes.
No, I think it's funny because whenever you talk to somebody in technology, stories like the one that Vic just told seem to inevitably come up. And to the points that we've made earlier in this podcast recording, the fact that the landscape is effectively unlimited because you have a digital concept, the availability of the cloud, everybody can get, 4 terabytes here, 100 gigabytes there of storage, and everything's everywhere. Getting everything under one umbrella, fully understood data outlay and protection type of jobs all through that single pane of glass really does, I think, make a huge benefit for a company that previously might have been decentralized and very wild west. And if there was a catastrophic failure and every single one of those outliers wasn't accounted for, then you would still be lost. I remember old stories where the quote unquote gold backup copy of the company's data was in the CEO's, den, and his kids were playing and they knocked a glass of water over onto a computer and it short circuited, and now they don't have backups anymore.
It's a little deeper than that. The landscape is gotten so complex, and, we talk about data sprawl a lot. Well, there's architectural sprawl. And so anything that can be done to remove complexity from an environment, streamline it, make it more efficient, frees up the staff and the architects and the admins and the DBAs to focus on, initiatives and business processes and activities that move the business forward. If you've got, a staff of 4 or 5 that are, constantly swapping out tapes, taking tapes off site, barcoding tapes, I'm using the tapes as an example, but, in today's world, babysitting backup jobs, seeing why backup jobs didn't fail, wondering if it made it to the storage device. Did those replicate? Are the replications any good? Can we do a recovery test? All things like that. If you can simplify and streamline those processes, then your business is going to have a competitive advantage. Absolutely.
I was part of one of the companies that I was working was a company. It's an online retailer It's been dubbed the Amazon for pets, and they just grew tremendously to the one of the biggest online acquisitions, record breaking at the time, for over $3 billion. And that was just using their archive data to do development. For us at the time, supply chain BI information was critical. So the fact that we could clone the BI databases almost in real time and extract the data to see how much we needed to purchase to get to supply the orders that we had, that was a differentiator for the business. So I would like to talk and bring it back to say, look, we know you guys are customers have these increased threat vectors. You guys have sprawl of complexity over locations, and now you're having regulatory oversight, and you don't even know where your data is. We're here to help, both Anexinet and Cohesity. We're here to put together a people, process, and technology plan to make sure that we bring this under control.
Totally agree.
We've talked about some features that are built in and seem like they would have a major advantage for any business that was using them. Features like data classification, security advisor, instant mass restore. Are there any other concepts that are pretty new that you think people don't either associate with Cohesity or just don't know that are available in the backup and recovery space?
Yeah, I would say we talked a little bit about it. We didn't put a name to it. It's called copy data management. But I think overall, I would go back to the comment that Vic talked about. And, we manage these silos of infrastructure and processes where, the networking team has to have a pipe for what they expect the data to be, and internet pipe to communicate with the cloud. And if we can make that stream more efficient and dedupe the heck out of it, compress the heck out of it, and only send incrementals, that kind of changes the whole conversation around how the organization manages the data. And I think that's what I would like to leave our listeners with, is that, one single change in the how can have ramifications of people and process. And that's the change, the disruptive change that you want to see in your organization.
What about other use cases that are not necessarily strictly backup and recovery that the platform can be used for? So there's some things that I'm thinking about, maybe a disaster recovery, a full environment that is cold versus hot versus warm type of site for an actual deployment across the country, and or utilizing the backup and recovery features to do sort of a migration, like a planned failover that just never fails back.
Yeah, that definitely, for cloud customers that are trying to get out of the data center business, that certainly is a service that we can both help accomplish, kind of a DR or migration strategy where, you can basically choose. I love our DR strategy because we have the concept of target. And within that concept, you have these constructs of where are the things that you're looking for. And within this constructs, your plan changes to IPs, names, VPCs, and security connections, all within the target location, which, being a DR person, that to me is changes the conversation, right? Because if I want to go to AWS from on-prem and stay there, that's something we can do. Or if you want to have cross-cloud replications or cross-region replications, those are all DR scenario that, if you think about it, is just a different target with different rules.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, Fidel, I don't know if you would classify that, you might be able to roll this up under the last point that you made, but, Cohesity has started to make some very strategic alliances and partnerships with a lot of MSPs out there as well, outside of the Amazons and Azures. specifically thinking about iLand and a few others that allow for, those companies or those instances where you only have one building and you need to go someplace, but you're not a big fan of Amazon for whatever reason, or Azure or whatever. But there are MSPs out there that Cohesity does integrate with as well.
Yeah, and that is we have three main models, right? We have the customer managed, the partner managed, where we have service providers that do provide Cohesity as a service, and now we have a Cohesity managed service. The big difference, and I would like to say, this is not a different product. This is the same Cohesity. It's just you choose your flavor of who's going to manage that. And effectively what we're doing, going back to Chris's point, is we are separating and creating a data plane versus a control plane. And the things that we can do there are backup, which we talked about, and recovery, disaster recovery, which is kind of that planned migration or not, or failover, fail back. You mentioned that file and object where we can host that, as well as security and analytics, and that dev and test use case that I call copy data management. And it's all the same data plane. The only thing that is different is the control plane.
Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense, especially, to Vic's point from earlier about a company that might not have a huge backup and recovery staff to have the ability to let experts handle it from the control plane while still having a single pane of glass to see where everything is, make sure everything's going as expected, and getting those regular reports about the success of backups and any issues with anomalies or detection or anything like that, just as quickly as if it was 100% managed on-prem.
Absolutely. And the reality is that we're seeing an evolution of the customer teams too, right? Before we used to have these silo separation of infrastructure and application owners. And now teams are still siloed, but now they lived on their own application. And now, the last iteration is we see a shift from infrastructure into data. And now they don't manage applications, they manage the data. They are owners of that data because that infrastructure might have gone to a SaaS product or to an IaaS product, and they don't have to worry of that. So this is a transformational of the IT department evolution as well. That's things to think about.
As we're wrapping up here, we've covered quite a lot of ground, and I really appreciate your time. I'll start with Vic. Is there anything that is in your mind that you want to either reemphasize, or any final points you want to make, something that you really want to make sure that people walk away from with information in the back of their heads?
I mean, yeah, Chris, backup has always been a complicated, from an architectural perspective, beast. It has so many tentacles that reach out to the environment. It really is less complicated when you bring experts like Cohesity and Anexinet in to help with it. And really the Cohesity solution does simplify and alleviate a lot of issues and problems that both IT and security infrastructure folks are dealing with today.
Fidel, any final thoughts?
I think, I want to reiterate, this is not an all or nothing. This is a transformational technology that can accommodate at any stage of the transformation of either the infrastructure, the team, or the data that you're on. So we're here to help as a team. And, we try to simplify things, and that's always welcome.
Simpler is better. I think that about covers it. So we'll leave it there. Fidel, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Vic. It was a pleasure.
Same here. Thank you.
All right, guys, take care.